Before we begin, imagine losing the only people you love, to the cruelty of those who thought they were untouchable. But what happens when their victim's son turns out to be someone trained to hunt shadows? Stay tuned till the end. And for more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Simply Stories. It was a quiet morning on the edge of a small southern town, the kind of morning that carried peace in its breath. The golden sunlight spilled gently across an old farmhouse surrounded by wide, endless fields of green. Birds sang from the wooden fences, and a soft breeze made the curtains inside the home sway lazily. An elderly black couple lived there, two souls who had worked hard all their lives and earned the right to rest. They lived simply, tending to their small vegetable garden, brewing coffee every sunrise, and sitting together on the porch where the world always seemed slower. They spoke softly, laughed easily, and carried the kind of love that had seen every storm and still chose calm. Inside the farmhouse, the walls told their story. Faded family photographs hung beside a collection of military medals, each shining faintly in the sunlight. Those medals belonged to their only son, a man who had once served his country as a decorated Delta Force commander. He was their pride, their strength, the child who had gone to war so that others could live in peace. After years of brutal missions and sleepless nights, he had returned home to find his own peace, a quiet cabin far away from the sound of gunfire. To his parents, that distance didn't matter. They believed peace ran in their blood, that kindness was a legacy worth leaving behind. But as peace often does, it drew the attention of those who lived off destruction. In that same town, a ruthless local mafia had begun expanding their grip. They were buying out farmlands and old properties to build a smuggling route that stretched beyond state lines. They saw the couple's land as the final piece of their empire. The farmland sat on a quiet road, but beneath it were old tunnels, abandoned since the war, perfect for hiding illegal goods. The Mafia offered money first, more than the land was worth. The couple refused. They had built their life there, brick by brick, with hands that had known both hardship and love. It wasn't just land to them, it was memory. Weeks passed, and the offers turned into threats. Men in expensive suits began appearing near their gate, warning them in low voices to think about it. The old man would smile and say he already had. The woman would step out, holding her rosary, whispering that she'd pray for their hearts to change. But greed never listens to grace. The Mafia's patience thinned. To them, an old couple was nothing more than an obstacle. They didn't see history in those walls, or love in that home, only opportunity. Then came the night when peace met its breaking point. The sky was dark, heavy with thunder, rain washing over the fields. The couple sat inside by the fire, the radio humming softly. They didn't see the headlights at first, two black SUVs crawling down the dirt road like predators in the night. The sound of tires crushing wet gravel made the old man look up. He walked to the window and his heart sank. The men stepping out were not strangers. They were the same ones who had been circling their land, now armed and cold-eyed. He opened the door before they could knock. "We told you," the man in front said, his voice low. "This is your last chance." The old man stood firm. "This land doesn't belong to your kind of world," he said quietly. The leader smirked, tilting his head toward the woman who stood behind her husband. "Then you'll lose it with the world you built." The first shot shattered the night. The woman screamed his name, but the next sound was the fire spreading. Bottles of gasoline tossed through the window, flames licking at the curtains, the smoke rising faster than cries could escape. The couple tried to fight the blaze, but the heat was merciless. He shielded her until the roof gave way, holding her hand till the end. By the time the storm cleared, all that was left was silence. The farmhouse was nothing but ash. The garden turned to black earth. When dawn broke, the smoke still drifted like ghosts refusing to leave. The townsfolk gathered, whispering in shock. The authorities called it an accident, faulty wiring, a tragic fire. But the townspeople knew. They had seen the strange cars that came in the night. They had heard the muffled sounds that didn't belong to thunder. Yet no one spoke. Fear had its own grip here, and silence was the price of survival. At the edge of the ruins, among the smoldering wood, lay the faint glint of something half buried in ash, a metal frame holding an old photograph. It was of the couple with their son, his uniform crisp, his smile steady. The picture was burned at the edges, but his eyes remained untouched, staring straight ahead as if even through the flames he was watching. Far away, the soldier would soon wake to the news that his parents were gone. But before that moment came, the wind swept gently through the ruins, carrying a final whisper of the life that once filled this place, a whisper of peace that refused to be forgotten. Hundreds of miles away, deep in the quiet of a mountain cabin, a man sat polishing an old military knife, the kind that had seen too many battles. The phone on the table began to ring, slicing through the silence. He almost ignored it until he saw the number. It was from home. When he answered, the voice on the other end trembled. "Your parents. They're gone. The house caught fire." The words didn't sound real. They floated for a moment in the air, heavy, cruel, impossible. The man who had faced death in every corner of the world suddenly forgot how to breathe. He lowered the phone slowly, his fingers trembling against the steel of his blade. The soldier, who had seen war, chaos, and loss, stood completely still, because this was the kind of pain no training could prepare him for. He left that night without saying a word. The drive back home stretched endlessly under the weight of memory. The rain hit the windshield like gunfire, the road blurred by headlights and grief. Every mile closer brought the past to life. His mother's laughter, his father's firm voice, the porch light always waiting for him when he came home from deployment. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, the sun had not yet risen. The place that once felt like peace now looked like a battlefield. The farmhouse he remembered, with its white porch and red door, was gone, replaced by blackened ruins still damp from the rain. Smoke clung to the ground like ghosts refusing to leave. He walked slowly toward the ashes, each step heavier than the last. The faint smell of burnt earth filled his lungs, mixing with memories that stabbed deeper than any wound. The authorities had left their traces, yellow tape fluttering in the wind, a few burnt markers, and a report pinned under a rock that read, "Accidental fire." But his instincts, the ones honed through years of war, told him otherwise. The ground told stories people ignored. He crouched down, fingertips brushing the soil, and there it was. A melted door lock, twisted by force from the outside. A shell casing buried in the mud, the kind not found in any home. The faint impression of boot prints. Not random, but uniform. Military grade. He didn't need anyone to explain. He knew what these signs meant. His parents hadn't died in an accident. They had been executed. He went to the local police station demanding answers, but the officers barely looked up from their desks. One of them smirked when he mentioned his parents' names. Another shrugged and said, "Case is closed." Their tone was flat, but their eyes betrayed something. Fear, or worse, guilt. Files had been lost, evidence misplaced, statements rewritten. The truth had been buried long before he arrived. The system he once defended had already sold itself to the highest bidder. That night he parked his truck near the edge of what used to be his home. He sat in silence, staring at the outline of the ruined farmhouse under the moonlight. For hours he didn't move. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the charred remains. No tears fell. Soldiers like him had learned to bury pain deep enough to keep fighting, but deep within that silence something hardened. He bowed his head, hands clasped together, and whispered words that came from somewhere between prayer and promise. "I will bring them peace." The next morning, he drove to the nearby city, not to mourn, but to begin. He contacted an old comrade, a man who still owed him a favor. Through encrypted channels and military networks that never truly shut down, he started gathering information. One by one, names surfaced. The enforcers, the dealers, the middlemen who delivered threats to his parents, the property agents who had forged the sale documents, and finally, the name behind it all. The Mafia boss who ruled the region like a silent king. A man who hid behind layers of lawyers, guards, and corrupt officials. A man who believed he could erase lives without consequence. The soldier studied his face on the screen. The man was younger than he expected, smug, smiling, posing at a charity event with politicians who shook his hand with pride. Around him, luxury glimmered like armor. But beneath the smiles, the soldier saw the truth, fear disguised as power. He had seen men like him before, men who built empires from blood and thought they'd never fall. He spent the next few days moving like a shadow through the city. He watched, listened, mapped every movement. His training returned like instinct, observation, patience, precision. This was not anger. It was focus. In his world, missions had objectives. This one had only one: justice. He began gathering supplies quietly. Untraceable weapons, surveillance gear, false IDs. Each item found its place with military precision. Every step was calculated. He no longer moved as a man mourning his parents. He moved as a commander preparing for war. Late one night, he sat on the rooftop of a deserted building overlooking the glowing city skyline. Somewhere down there lived the men who thought they had gotten away with murder. The lights of the city reflected in his eyes, cold and sharp as the steel he carried. "This isn't revenge," he murmured to himself. "It's balance." The kind of balance the world forgets until someone forces it back, and as the city slept, the soldier finally stopped being still. Justice was no longer waiting. It was already moving, silent, precise, and merciless, carried by the hands of the man they should have never awakened. The attacks began quietly, like whispers before a storm. It started with one of the Mafia's collectors, a man known for his cruelty, the kind who broke bones to make people pay. He was found slumped over his steering wheel at dawn, alive but terrified, his weapons and money missing, his phone smashed to pieces. The gang thought it was a robbery, a random act of defiance. But then, a convoy carrying a shipment of illegal goods vanished on a mountain road. The trucks were found miles apart, engines cold, drivers unconscious. No sign of a struggle, no bullet holes, no bodies. The only thing left behind was a single set of footprints leading into the forest. Security footage showed nothing. Cameras went dark moments before every attack. The gang's lieutenants argued in smoky rooms, their nerves fraying. Someone was hunting them, but not like any rival gang. Whoever it was moved with impossible precision, hitting where it hurt most. Their money, their roots, their men. Their network was being dismantled piece by piece, and the more they tried to respond, the more they fell apart. This wasn't chaos. This was discipline. This was a mission. The man behind it, the ex-commando, had spent years fighting wars others could only imagine. Now he was fighting one of his own. He had turned his grief into strategy, his rage into order. Each night he studied his targets, tracking their schedules, their habits, their blind spots. He infiltrated their safe houses disguised as a mechanic, a delivery driver, a nobody. He placed cameras where no one would look, drones that hummed like insects above rooftops, microphones hidden in streetlights. He watched and waited until every piece of the puzzle fell into place. When he struck, it was always clean. No wasted bullets. No witnesses. One night, he intercepted a deal near the docks where the Mafia forced workers into illegal labor. He moved through the shadows like smoke, silent and invisible. By the time the guards noticed something was wrong, half of them were already disarmed. The captives, men and women who had been kept there for months, stared at him with disbelief as he cut their chains. He gave them cash, phones, and transport routes out of town. "They helped build your empire," he muttered to the unconscious guard at his feet. "Now they'll help destroy it." The freed workers became his quiet allies, feeding him information, locations, and names. They called him the Ghost, because he appeared only when needed and vanished before anyone could thank him. Every move he made was methodical. Power plants sabotaged, accounts drained, shipments intercepted. The Mafia's money flow began drying up, their influence shrinking overnight. The boss grew restless. He doubled his guards, moved his meetings, changed his routines, but the attacks kept coming. His most trusted men started disappearing. Some were found hanging upside down from warehouse beams, left alive as warnings. Others simply vanished without a trace. The rumor spread fast that the old couple's son had returned, that he was the one haunting them. When the boss finally confirmed it through one of his terrified lieutenants, his rage shook the room. "He's one man," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. But deep down, he knew better. This was no ordinary man. This was a soldier who had seen hell and come back with a plan. He put a bounty on the soldier's head, promising a fortune to anyone who brought him in, dead or alive. But no one dared to try. Every hunter sent after him vanished before dawn. Some were found miles away, stripped of their weapons and their courage, whispering about a figure that moved faster than sound and disappeared like smoke. The police refused to get involved. Too many had already been exposed for taking the Mafia's money. The media stayed silent, afraid to stir the hornet's nest. And yet the people, the same townsfolk who once whispered in fear, began to watch from their windows with quiet hope. Someone was finally fighting back. As weeks passed, the Mafia's empire crumbled. Warehouses went up in flames in the dead of night, their explosions lighting up the skyline like fireworks of justice. Bank accounts were emptied through hacked transfers, and their lawyers began to flee the city. Fear replaced loyalty. Men who once killed without hesitation now refused to show up for work. The organization that had ruled with intimidation was now paralyzed by it. The boss grew desperate, his paranoia consuming him. He stopped sleeping, demanded constant protection, and moved between safe houses like a man being hunted by his own shadow. Every time he looked out the window, he imagined a rifle's scope staring back. Every night he dreamed of fire in the faces of the couple he had killed, and behind them the eyes of their son, cold and unblinking. And still, the soldier didn't stop. He moved from one target to the next with surgical precision, dismantling every last piece of the operation. What had begun as revenge had now become something larger. A reckoning. He wasn't just avenging his parents. He was purging the corruption that had poisoned their town. He wasn't a man seeking death anymore. He was the embodiment of justice they had all been denied. By the end of that month, the Mafia's empire existed only in whispers and ashes. No one knew when the final strike would come, only that it would. And when it did, there would be no warning, no mercy, and no survivors. The silent war was almost over, and the ghost who fought it was just getting started. The Mafia boss believed he had finally gained control of the chaos that had been haunting him for weeks. His men were terrified, his empire burned to the ground, but he had one last plan, a trap that would lure the ghost out of hiding. He ordered his remaining enforcers to set up in an abandoned warehouse at the edge of the industrial district. Every corner was rigged with explosives, every exit guarded, every shadow lit by motion sensors. In his mind, this was it. The moment he would finally crush the man who had destroyed everything he built. As he waited inside the flickering light of that warehouse, cigar smoke curling around his trembling fingers. He couldn't shake the fear crawling up his spine. "He's just one man," he muttered, trying to convince himself. Just one man. But even his guards knew that wasn't true. The ghost wasn't just a man. He was vengeance carved out of pain, trained by war and sharpened by loss. Outside, the night was quiet. The rain tapped against broken glass, the streets empty except for the faint hum of an approaching engine. Then headlights appeared through the mist, a single black truck stopping just short of the entrance. The driver stepped out slowly, his boots crunching against gravel. No backup, no hesitation, no fear. The ex-commando had come. The boss watched from the upper level, heart pounding as the soldier entered the warehouse without a word. The doors closed behind him, locking him inside. "Now!" the boss shouted, and a dozen gunmen opened fire. The building filled with the deafening sound of bullets and smoke. But when the gunfire stopped, there was silence. Heavy, eerie silence. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Then, from the smoke, came movement. A flash grenade rolled across the floor, followed by another. The room exploded with light and sound. Through the haze, a figure moved. Silent, precise, unstoppable. One by one, the gunmen fell, each hit with clean, surgical accuracy. The soldier moved like a ghost through fire, using the smoke to mask his approach, his thermal goggles cutting through the confusion. Every step he took was measured, every strike purposeful. The boss ran to the control room, watching the security monitors flicker one by one as his men dropped. He could hear their screams echoing through the metal walls. Desperate, he grabbed his gun and barked into his radio. "Find him! Kill him!" But his commands went unanswered. All he heard was static, and then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, growing closer. He spun around and fired wildly into the darkness, bullets ricocheting off the walls. Then came a voice, calm and low, echoing behind him. "You thought you could erase them with fire," the soldier said. "But you only lit a fuse." The boss turned, sweat dripping from his forehead, his hand shaking as he aimed the gun. "You think killing me will bring them back?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of fear. The soldier stepped into the light, his face cold, emotionless, his eyes hollow yet burning with quiet fury. "No," he replied softly, "but it will make the world a little safer for people like them." The boss lunged for his trigger, but before the sound of the shot could even register, the soldier fired once. A single bullet echoed through the empty building, silencing years of corruption in one heartbeat. The Mafia boss fell to the ground, his weapon clattering beside him. The soldier stood over him for a moment, expression unreadable, then turned away. Minutes later, distant sirens wailed. Police cars surrounded the warehouse, responding to an anonymous tip. When they entered, they found the crime scene laid out like a confession. Weapons stacked, money trails documented, names of corrupt officials pinned to the walls. Every secret the Mafia had buried was exposed, but the man responsible for it all was gone, vanished without a trace. Days later, under a soft gray sky, a lone man stood before two graves at the town cemetery. The same hands that once held rifles now held white lilies. The breeze rustled the trees as he knelt down, brushing dirt from the carved names of his parents. "You can rest now," he whispered, voice breaking just slightly. "It's done." The wind carried his words into the distance, as though the earth itself exhaled in peace. Months passed. The town that had once lived in fear began to breathe again. A new community center rose on the land that once belonged to his parents, built from the donations of people they had helped over the years. Children played where ashes once lay, their laughter filling the air. On the front of the building, a plaque gleamed under the sun. "Peace deserves protection." People who passed by every day didn't know the full story, only that someone had made sure justice was done. The soldier was never seen again, but sometimes, late at night, townsfolk claimed they saw a figure near the gate, watching quietly before disappearing into the fog. As the camera pulled back, showing the children playing, the town alive again, the narrator's voice broke through softly. "Never mistake kindness for weakness. The quietest hearts often belong to the strongest souls. Justice isn't always served by the law. Sometimes it's delivered by the hands of those who've lost everything." The story faded into silence, leaving behind a single truth: that even in the darkest times, light can return, carried by those who refuse to let evil win.